Fritz spent his life searching through other people's pasts, rescuing forgotten objects and turning them into stories the world could understand. But when his own life came to an end, it wasn't the cameras, the fame, or even the lawsuits that shocked people the most. It was what no one knew he had been quietly building, hiding, and documenting for decades. When authorities and close friends finally opened his estate, they realized Frank had been telling one final story all along, and it was darker, richer, and more complicated than anyone imagined. The man everyone thought they knew. For millions of viewers, Fritz was a familiar presence, the bearded, soft-spoken half of American pickers, the calm counterweight to Mike Wolfe's fast talk and boundless energy. Week after week, he climbed into dusty barns, crawled through collapsing sheds, and smiled with quiet satisfaction when he found something worth saving. To the audience, Frank seemed simple, almost transparent. A guy who loved old motorcycles, gas station signs, and rusty treasures. But that version of Frank was only what the cameras captured. Off-screen, his life was layered with discipline, obsession, pain, and long stretches of silence that very few people ever saw. Fritz was born in Davenport, Iowa, in October 1963. From the start, he wasn't wired like other kids. While his classmates were trading baseball cards or chasing whatever was popular at the time, Frank was collecting what most people overlooked: rocks, coins, stamps, old beer cans, even discarded razor blades and staples pulled from school papers. It wasn't random hoarding. Frank wanted to understand why things existed, who touched them, and how long they had survived. He once said that people threw away history without realizing it, and that idea stayed with him for life. After attending Sutherland Intermediate and Bettendorf High School, Frank didn't follow a traditional path. College never interested him. He believed knowledge came from experience, from handling objects, studying wear patterns, and listening to the stories attached to them. Instead, he built a stable career as a fire inspector across Iowa, a job he held for nearly 25 years. It was demanding, technical, and precise, and without anyone realizing it, that job sharpened the same instincts that would later make him famous. Inspecting old buildings taught Frank how to scan environments, notice inconsistencies, and detect value hidden behind decay. Even then, collecting never stopped. As a teenager, Frank bought a Harley-Davidson motorcycle at 16 for a price that stunned his parents. He worked multiple jobs to pay for it, convinced he wasn't buying a vehicle, but preserving a piece of history. Over time, that philosophy expanded. Flea markets turned into road trips. Garage sales became research missions. Fire inspections became quiet treasure hunts. By the early 2000s, Frank wasn't just collecting, he was curating, cataloging, and keeping mental records of where things came from and why they mattered. When Frank opened his shop, Frank's Finds, in Savannah, Illinois, it wasn't meant to be polished or accessible. It was dense, dark, and overwhelming, like stepping inside his mind. Firehouse memorabilia, vintage tools, motorcycle parts, and forgotten Americana filled the space. Some people didn't understand it, others immediately did. What no one realized was that this shop was only the surface layer. The most important parts of Frank's collection were never meant to be seen casually. They were being stored, documented, and protected somewhere else entirely. And that hidden world wouldn't come to light until after Frank was gone. The brotherhood that built a phenomenon. Long before American Pickers became a television institution, Fritz and Mike Wolfe were just two boys in Iowa who shared the same strange curiosity. They met in 8th grade, not because they were inseparable friends at first, but because they were drawn to the same forgotten corners of life. While other kids chased trends, Frank and Mike spent weekends digging through flea markets, barns, and garages, fascinated by objects no one else wanted. Even then, their personalities were different. Mike dreamed big, talked fast, and imagined possibilities beyond the horizon. Frank was quieter, more deliberate, focused on the object itself rather than the future it might bring. After high school, their paths diverged but never fully separated. Mike leaned deeper into the idea of turning picking into something larger than a hobby. By the early 2000s, he was filming his own picking trips, driving across states, knocking on doors, and pitching the concept to networks. Frank, meanwhile, was content running Frank's Finds. He liked the rhythm of the shop, the slow accumulation of knowledge, and the feeling that he controlled his own world. For a long time, he resisted Mike's vision. The idea of being followed by cameras didn't excite him. Stability mattered more than exposure. That changed gradually, through small but powerful moments. Frank began realizing how valuable his instincts really were. He bought a simple item for $15 and later sold it for hundreds. He picked up a fraternal badge for just over $100 and flipped it for more than 10 times that amount. Those deals weren't just wins, they were confirmation. His knowledge worked anywhere, not just inside his shop. When Mike pushed again, Frank finally agreed to join him on the road. When American Pickers premiered on the History Channel in January 2010, no one expected what followed. The show exploded. Millions tuned in to watch two men drive through rural America, knocking on doors and uncovering pieces of forgotten history. Their chemistry felt real because it was. Mike negotiated, performed, and energized the room. Frank grounded the moment. He listened. He connected with homeowners. He asked about memories rather than prices. Viewers trusted him. Within months, the show was pulling massive ratings. Episodes crossed the 5 million viewer mark. Fans lined up at appearances, often overwhelming Frank, who genuinely didn't understand why people wanted his autograph. He once looked at a crowd and asked what they were all doing there, then stayed until the last person left. That was Frank, uncomfortable with fame, but unwilling to disappoint. Behind the scenes, the structure of the partnership was clear. Mike was the driver of the brand. Frank was the heart of the hunt. The dynamic worked until pressure started to change everything. Fame brought expectations. Production schedules tightened. The show became less spontaneous. And slowly, the balance Frank believed in began to slip. While audiences saw laughter and banter, cracks were forming that cameras never showed. Frank didn't want to be a character. He wanted to be himself. And as the show grew bigger, that became harder to protect. Those tensions would soon collide with Frank's health, his identity, and the silence that would eventually end a friendship millions believed was unbreakable. Illness, isolation, and the fall no one saw coming. Behind Frank Fritz's calm smile, his body had been fighting a war for decades. Long before American Pickers made him a household name, Frank was living with Crohn's disease, a chronic, painful illness that quietly shaped nearly every part of his adult life. Flare-ups brought exhaustion, weight loss, and constant discomfort, but Frank rarely talked about it. On set, he pushed through long days of filming, travel, and physical labor, determined not to let illness define him. Most viewers never knew how much effort it took just for him to show up. As the show's popularity grew, the pressure grew with it. Frank wasn't built for constant attention. Being recognized everywhere, watched, judged, and expected to perform began to wear him down. Anxiety crept in. To manage it, he was prescribed Xanax. At the same time, alcohol slowly became a crutch. Frank later admitted that fame didn't make his life easier. It amplified everything he was already struggling with. In July 2017, those private struggles became public. Frank was stopped by police after driving the wrong way on an Iowa interstate. He admitted he had been drinking and had taken Xanax. The arrest for operating while intoxicated didn't send him to jail, but it shattered the image many fans had of him. For Frank, it was humiliating. He felt exposed, judged, and misunderstood. Then came the injuries. Years of physical work caught up with him. A severe back problem required major surgery, leaving him with rods in his spine and hundreds of stitches. Recovery was brutal. During that time, the world shut down, isolation set in, and pain medication entered his life. What began as treatment slowly turned into dependence. While Frank was recovering, something else hurt even more: silence. He later said that during his surgery and recovery, Mike Wolfe never called. No check-in, no visit. Whether intentional or not, Frank took it as abandonment. By the time production asked for a clean drug test before allowing him back on the show, Frank couldn't pass it. His final episode aired quietly, without closure. To the public, it looked like time off. To Frank, it felt like being erased. The stroke that changed everything. Frank Fritz's life collapsed in a single morning. In July 2022, a friend walked into Frank's Iowa farmhouse and found him lying on the floor, unable to speak or move. The call to emergency services was urgent and confused. Frank appeared to be seizing. By the time he reached the hospital, doctors confirmed what had already happened: a massive stroke that had caused severe and permanent damage. He survived, but the man who came out of the hospital was not the man who went in. One side of his body no longer functioned properly. His speech was limited. His ability to reason, plan, and make decisions had been deeply affected. After weeks in the hospital, he was transferred to rehabilitation, beginning a slow and painful process that never truly reversed the damage. Within weeks, the court intervened. Medical assessments concluded Frank could no longer care for himself or manage his own affairs. He couldn't reliably ensure food, shelter, medical care, or personal safety. A judge placed him under legal guardianship. His close friend Chris Davis was appointed to make personal decisions. A bank was assigned to manage his finances. Frank's world became smaller and more controlled. Medical costs surged to nearly $30,000 a month. Around-the-clock care, therapy, specialized equipment, and treatment for Crohn's disease and respiratory issues drained his savings rapidly. His investment income covered only a fraction of what he needed to survive. Friends who visited said the most painful part wasn't just his physical decline, it was his awareness. Frank knew exactly what was happening to him. He knew what he had lost. He tried to lift his arm and watched it fall. He tried to speak and couldn't finish sentences. Over time, some believed he lost the will to fight. During this period, relationships were redefined. Old conflicts faded. When Mike Wolfe finally visited him again in 2023, it was quiet and emotional. There were no cameras, no negotiations, no roles to play. Just two men confronting the weight of everything left unsaid. Frank would never return to television, and he would never again roam barns and back roads looking for history. But what waited behind the locked doors of his estate was something no one was prepared for. Inside the garage, the discovery that shocked everyone. After Frank Fritz passed away in late September, those closest to him began the painful task of sorting through what he left behind. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Paperwork, tools, personal items. But when they unlocked the doors to his old garage and storage buildings, the story changed instantly. What they found wasn't just a collection. It was a hidden archive of Frank's entire life, carefully built, quietly protected, and never meant for casual eyes. Row after row of vintage motorcycles filled the space, more than 75 in total, some restored to near perfection, others left untouched, waiting for parts Frank had already tracked down and documented in handwritten journals. The oldest dated back more than a century. Indian motorcycles, Harley-Davidsons, British machines from Vincent, BSA, and Triumph. And then there were the prototypes, bikes experts believed were lost forever. A one-of-a-kind Indian Chief prototype from the late 1940s alone was estimated to be worth $250,000. But the motorcycles were only the beginning. Tucked behind them was something no one expected: Aerosmith's long-lost tour van from their earliest days. the same one Frank and Mike had once rescued and restored years earlier. Nearby were rare pop culture artifacts, including early Yoda prototypes from Star Wars that even industry insiders thought had been destroyed decades ago. Each item had a story, and Frank had written them all down. Dozens of journals detailed where every piece came from, who owned it before, and what it took to bring it back. Those journals revealed something darker, too. Frank wrote about his isolation after leaving the show, about feeling pushed aside, about people circling his estate when his health declined, about fear, not of death, but of losing control over what he had spent a lifetime building. As inventory specialists completed their review, estimates climbed quickly. The motorcycle collection alone was valued between $2 and $3 million. The full estate hovered near $6 million. And suddenly, Frank's private world became public, triggering lawsuits, accusations, and a battle over who truly knew him best. What Frank left behind wasn't just wealth. It was proof that even in silence, he was still telling his story. Frank Fritz spent his life preserving history, but in the end, his own story became the most complicated one of all. Do you believe his legacy should belong to family, or to the friends who stood by him when everything fell apart? Let us know your thoughts, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this.